on every Navy fighter aircraft in the fleet, on every fighter aircraft the Israelis have, on a number of other Air Force craft, all of the supercarriers. And this technology is now reduced to the portable size where an individual can be made invisible. So it's gone through many generations of revamping and shrinking of the size of the equipment, which says two things. One, solid-state technology has become of age, and you are now able to do in a very small package things that it once took a huge pile of equipment to do. Secondly, they've modified the equipment to some extent so that it is now possible to make it portable and still completely effective. What the principles now are that they're using, I don't know. I don't know if it bears a resemblance to the original procedures or not, but they do have it working. In fact, there's even a famous photo available of President Bush and his Secret Service man out fishing at Kennebunkport, Maine in the surf, and in between the two of them there is a fishing pole standing there fishing with nobody hanging onto it, quite invisible hands holding it up. This is rather a famous picture, and it is there. It has been publicized in a couple of newspapers, and merely goes to show that the government has rather good control over this sort of thing. There are other stories, not apocryphal, but real. Yeah, this is the famous picture. Right.
Famous picture, and we see the
you see the president on the right in his pink shirt, Secret Service man on the left with his arms crossed, and the fishing pole standing there all by itself in the surf. And it's very strange. If you look closely, you will see down in the water there are splash marks around invisible feet. Right between the two, yes, right there. The angle seems a little bit off in terms of the way the poles are fishing, but we don't have the full picture of exactly what bay they were in or where this was and exactly where their lines were actually anchored. But this now can be done by either one of two techniques. One, hardware, or the second one, I understand, is they can put the human, that is a Secret Service man, through a special processing where without hardware he becomes invisible for about 72 hours. And then he starts to do the invisible man number and start to come back into visibility, and also he gets, I understand, violently ill when in the process of coming back to, quote, normalcy, unquote. Either way, they have control over processes of invisibility.
Hangover.
You might have a very powerful invisible hangover, and the hangover is not invisible to the person who has to withstand it. This is only one of the aspects of many things which have occurred.
One very interesting thing here that comes to my attention is that if all carriers and if all planes are equipped with this invisibility, which basically is also a teleportation technique, then practically all confrontation on this planet become impossible, because you cannot fight a fleet that can hop around the world oceans at will, just flipping the numbers.
Flipping the dials and showing up somewhere else, after turning on the invisibility.
Strokes on the keyboard.
There's more than one report of this, of a fleet going invisible in the Pacific, off radar, off optical view by private aircraft that happen to be flying in the area. And the fleet shows up a day later, so a couple of thousand miles away, and steaming under completely normal conditions where it doesn't appear like anything has happened, just so they've changed location in the meantime, and they were totally off all radar, were not visible, and could not be tracked in that period of time. They made a quick jump of some type, and were there. How they explain this to the sailors, I don't know. How they explain to the personnel on board the ship that are not in on the equipment, because these big carriers and larger ships, everybody does not know about the equipment, only a handful of personnel, including the skipper, of course.
Maybe this film, The Final Countdown, gives an idea of how this is explained. They simply said that it was a whirlwind, a cyclone with some time-changing characteristics that moved the ship back in time to the Pearl Harbor attack.
Yes, that film purported to be fictional, and they got away with it, you might say, by showing it as a freak of nature. Well, nature does not engage in those kind of freaks, not so far as we know at any time. My information was that it was a real test. They had the equipment on board. It was the Nimitz, and they were the first ones to be so equipped. And they went back into the past on direct orders to the day before Pearl Harbor with the intent, whoever gave the orders, that the aircraft on the Nimitz would wipe out the invading Japanese fleet before there was an attack and prevent the attack and thereby change history. Well, as it showed in the movie, one of the civilian observers along was arguing with the captain. He says, "Do you want to play God and change all history?" He says, "If you do," he says, "you don't know how many people will be living who might otherwise have died in the attack, and you can change the whole structure, as it were, of our history and the possible outcome of the war." And nonetheless, in the actual movie, the skipper did not win. He started the attack, but then in the movie, the natural phenomena closed in on him and the attack was canceled. In fact, I understand that the skipper got cold feet and called off the attack and pulled the planes back and then returned the ship to current time.
So basically, all these things show that if these things are real, that the whole Cold War has been a very clever Mickey Mouse game between the two superpowers in order to siphon tremendous amount of funding into these black projects. Because technically, both superpowers are armed with these advanced technologies. You cannot literally fight a war, or you can destroy the whole planet. But my important point is, what do you think about the recent revelations from so many places that basically this whole war has been a very clever arrangement between the two superpowers that have been transferring technology behind the scenes?
Are you referring to World War II? Or
after that?
Not after. Insofar as World War II is concerned, I would say yes. There was a great deal of covert transfer of technology, not just before, but during the war. Before the war, it was not covert. During the war, it was covert, and then after the war, of course, we seized everything because Nazi Germany surrendered. That is, the Nazi group surrendered Germany. They did not surrender, period. The Nazis never surrendered, which is one of the best-kept secrets of history. They merely moved out of Germany and went to Antarctica and took all their best projects and hardware with them. But insofar as the covert technology transfer is concerned, there's a great deal of evidence that there was a continuing covert transfer of personnel. My father was in on some of this smuggling of people out of Germany to the U.S. prior to and during the early part of World War II. And with it, some of the technology, because the Germans developed their own time machine in 1945. We developed the equivalent of it with the Philadelphia experiment in 43, and an actual one in 44.
These two projects have been secretly coordinated from a higher level so that to compare notes and to see which one would do it better.
That would be true, except for the fact the Germans had no invisibility project. There's no evidence they had one of any kind, but there is some partial evidence to the effect that there may have been an attempt by a Nazi sympathizer to steal the Eldridge in the final test and take it out to sea and turn it over to the Germans.
Or maybe it may have been an attempt by the American power elite to transfer this technology to Germany, as there have been many such cases in history of transferring super technologies to Russia before the Second World War, during the Second World War, after the Second World War, in order to boost up Germany's resistance.
Possibly true. The problem with that is, however, that while at some higher level there was covert cooperation, and during the war, of course, there was a great deal of cooperation between the U.S. and the USSR, and they were given, literally, some 25 pounds of purified uranium before the war was over,
The Russians.
The Russians were.